Hey teachers, welcome back to WHAP Teacher Talk. Today I wanted to do a quick intro of Unit 2 and just my approach to the unit, what I emphasize, and what skills I start to introduce. First off, before we even get into it, I will just say I typically lump Unit 1 and 2 together. I still teach them like in the order. I do Unit 1 first and then move on to Unit 2. So I distinguish them so that if kids are going and doing practice questions on AP Classroom or whatever, they know which unit we're still in. But basically, I don't give them a big test until we get through Unit 2 because, again, if you go as quickly through Unit 1 as I normally do, it really makes more sense that way. So anyway, just so that you know, you can do this two totally separate units. What I will say is just make sure to remind your kids over and over again that this is still the same time period as Unit 1. A lot of students last year got confused because they're used to, okay, Unit 1 is on one thing, and then we're moving on in history too. And the way the College Board has divided their units, right, it's like 2 units, or sometimes at the end 3, are all covering the same time period just through different lenses. So I just remind my students of that over and over again, so that they kind of get used to it and they realize that when they're reading about Unit 2, they're reading about the same states that they learned about in Unit 1. Okay. So Unit 2 is called Networks of Exchange, and it's pretty straightforward. It's the 3 main trade routes, and it's the Mongols. That's what this unit covers. So again, you're basically taking the states that they learned about in Unit 1, and then you're putting them in conversation with each other. You're basically saying, okay, well, how did China interact with these other places? Did innovation spread? How were they connected together? How did cultures spread? And also the Mongols sort of wiped the slate clean. They conquer a lot of those states that we talked about in Unit 1, and sort of create this newer, more modern world. So what's important in this unit is really just 2 things. You want students to know how important innovations expanded trade routes. So basically what led to these trade routes getting bigger in the 11, 12, 1300s. Beyond just the simple answer of like, oh, well, the Mongols reunited Silk Road trade. Well, even before the Mongols, right, the Song dynasty were growing more powerful. Their cities were growing bigger because they were on one end of the Silk Road and another end of the Indian Ocean routes. So you want to really emphasize the innovations. They don't need to memorize and know how an astrolabe works, but they would want to understand which innovations kind of helped expand different trade routes and how. This is a really good opportunity to start teaching kids how to break down an argument and not just say, oh, the astrolabe led to increased Indian Ocean trade. This is a good opportunity for you to start being that annoying teacher that's like, why, how, why, getting them to really break down the steps. And I'll talk about that in a second. The other question is then, how did these expanded trade routes, like what did they lead to? So they lead to people moving around, which also leads to cultural diffusion, which is a huge theme in this AP World History class. One of the most repeated sort of phrases or topics throughout the whole CED is cultural diffusion to some extent, right? Culture spreading, changing, creating new syncretic religions or traditions, or also just like supplanting old ones, whatever. We also want to know, how did trade routes lead to state power? What states are rising and becoming more powerful, or even just coming into existence because of trade routes? This is where you can really get into some really key like trading cities that essentially operate like city-states. And I'll talk about a project I do in a second. And then also the environmental changes, right? So you want to think about diffusion of crops leading to population boom. Champa rice is one that my kids are always obsessed with. They just think it's a really fun word. Champa rice coming from Vietnam to China is going to lead to this population boom, which is one of the many reasons why Song China became such an urban cosmopolitan civilization. A similar thing happens with bananas coming from Southeast Asia to Africa. And then obviously we have the negative sides of like the Black Death, which is what all the kids just want to talk about. So what are my favorite lessons? So here are 2. This is when I introduce my first secondary source reading, and I basically have the kids read. I kind of cut it down to make it a little bit shorter, but essentially the intro of the book, Genghis Khan and the Making of the Modern World, it's awesome, and the kids really like it. Like I literally asked them on the last day of school this last year, I like listed out all the different like articles and stuff I'd had them read. And this was the one by far that every kid was like, yes, I remember that. It was interesting. You should keep doing it. It's just really interesting. It's a really good way to introduce kids to historical writing. So you're not getting into them writing essays yet, but you can start to show kids like, hey, what's his thesis? What's the claim he's making about Genghis Khan? What evidence is he using? So again, you can start to show them those elements that'll eventually become their LEQ and their DBQ, but in a way that's a little less stressful. I literally have them read it, and then we sit around and have sort of like almost an English class style discussion about it. And we also break down his argument and then talk about, is there more evidence to support it? Is there any evidence that might conflict? That sort of thing. Then I do spend a lot of time on a project, not a lot of time, but a few days on a trading city tourism project that I have up on my website. So essentially groups get assigned a different trading city, and then they're like the board of tourism trying to encourage people to come there. They have to create a few materials. One of my favorites is they have to write like Yelp style reviews. The kids get super creative because again, they don't need to know every trading city, but I do suggest that kids walk away feeling like they understand at least one important trading city on each of the trade routes. So you can pick that for them, right? You can just say, we're only going to look at these three. We're going to look at Malacca, Kashgar, and Timbuktu. Or what I do is I have more options, and then each group picks one. And so by the end, it's like they've kind of gotten a good overview, and then they know their one way in depth. Okay, what skills go well with this unit? This is the unit to introduce causation, right? So in unit 1, it really naturally is a comparison unit. The Abbasid and the Song dynasty, or whatever, Aztec, Inca, that's really what the unit's all about. This unit is now all about causation. And so this is about innovations expanding trade routes. This is about trade routes leading to change. This is about the impact, like the Mongols leading to all these new kind of more expanded trade routes, all the impacts of the Mongols, positive and negative. And so this is a really good opportunity to, like I said just a bit ago, to start teaching kids how to break it down at an AP level. And what I mean by that is like when they're eventually writing an essay or writing anything in an AP history class, if they're asked about innovations that expand trade routes, right, a student will normally say, the caravanserai helped expand the Silk Road trading route. And then they move on. And at the AP level, what we want them doing is saying, how? How did it help expand? So they say their answer is, well, the caravanserai helped expand the Silk Road, but then they need more sentences with their analysis and their historical reasoning, right? So that's where like causation as one of those kind of historical reasoning skills comes in, where they can say, well, let's break it down, right? The caravanserai was essentially a safe stopping point for caravans along the Silk Road. So more people started traveling because they knew that they would have safe places to stay where they wouldn't be robbed. And so because of that, right, it's like they're really breaking down each step, and you can get really annoying with this if you want to. A lot of times for a quick activity on the innovations is I just write the innovations on flashcards, or in this case, we'd probably use something like Padlet online. And I literally give each student or group like one innovation that they just have to define. Like, here's what a caravanserai is. And then we just make a mind map where they say, okay, caravanserai led to the expansion of the Silk Road and the Saharan trade routes. And then another student or group has to come in and write out in complete sentences the explanation, like connect the dots basically between these like sort of Silk Road motels and the expansion of that trade. And so again, that's something you can kind of break down for them. And I believe I have an activity like that that's super, super simple. It's like a worksheet on my website too. The other thing is I introduce the SAQ in this unit. So I introduced the idea of what that looks like because the last few sections of the CED, I think it's like 2.5, 2.6, 2.7, are all more general. Like with the CED in general, the last topic or 2 or 3 kind of zooms out, and they talk about the different consequences of connectivity. So they talk about the environmental consequences, the cultural consequences, that sort of thing. And so it lends itself to a good sort of SAQ practice as part of the way you can assess if they got it. And again, I have a sample SAQ that I walk my kids through up on my website. All right. What does not go well in this unit? I I find it's hard to make trade routes super interesting for kids. That's why I did that trading tourism one to make it a little bit more lively. And really, just kids want to talk about the Mongols. They want to talk about the Mongols, or they want to talk about the Black Death in Europe. And they want to spend like a week on it. And teachers do as well. I want to just talk about the Mongols. I want to do a whole Black Death simulation where they pick the beans out of the bags and whatever, but you just don't have time for it. The Black Death is like an aside, right? It's like, okay, well, yes, it led to the Black Death. We can talk about that for 5 minutes, but we got to get back to like the Indian Ocean, which is really the most important trading route as far as AP World is concerned. So this is something where they want to talk about the stuff they're already familiar with. So you got to figure out ways to make the Indian Ocean trading route, which is really like the center of the world at this point, more interesting. I show clips from Moana to talk about navigation, right? I sing the clip of like, we read by the wind and the sky, and they laugh. And it's like, we do anything that you can to try to get them more interested in these massive ocean trading routes that are really like the thing kind of connecting everything together. So good luck with Unit 2. Make sure that you send your kids over to my WAP videos for students playlist, because I'll be introducing them to Unit 2 in terms of the broad themes, the major questions they should be able to answer. And I'm going to do some deep dives into some of these like trading routes or institutions that rose up to support this trade. Thanks. Bye.